to be good, but really isn't, you see, by means of a firm will. And to reflect, to refuse to act or decide in certain circumstances except after mature deliberation. So he seems to be saying that we can be confused by appearances unless, and this sounds like Descartes and Spinoza, unless we make sure of clear understanding as a result of reflection, mature deliberation. Okay? So in that sense, what would happen is that clarity of thought will dispel the confusion about appearances, and you'll see that it's a deceptive appearance, and therefore you will desire something other, which you are quite free to do. Free meaning out of your natural inclination for what now appears good. So what appears to you to be good, which is what you are naturally inclined to pursue, what naturally appears to you to be good may change that appearance when the mind gains sufficient reflection, mature judgment. Now, there's another passage that I think we have to compare with that, back on page 208 in the Monadology. 208, paragraph 30. He's just been saying that it is reason which raises human beings to a knowledge of ourselves and of God, so that by virtue of rationality we can have a clearer understanding of ourselves, and we know God as the good by virtue of rationality. Now, in paragraph 30, by knowledge of necessary truths and their abstraction, we rise to acts of reflection. That's what he was saying earlier, that we need it. We need to reflect. We rise to acts of reflection which make us think of that which calls itself I, to observe that this or that is within us. It is thus that in thinking of ourselves, we think of a being of substance, of the immaterial, and of God himself, conceiving that what is limited in us is in him without limits. So reflection gives us an idea of that which is far better than we, which should be desired. Okay? And so the whole natural inclination is tied to clarity of thought and to the rule of reason. Now, those are the passages which make it seem as if he is arguing for freedom of the will. Now, there's a problem there that emerges when we turn to page 233. 233, which is in the excerpts from a more fragmentary work labeled here First Truths. First Truths and Necessary Truths. Okay, and at the very bottom of 232, you have this italicized beginning of a paragraph. The perfect concept of an individual, okay, there's the essence, the nature, includes all its predicates, past, present, and future. So everything about an individual is contained within the nature of the individual. Future predicates, that is to say, actions which are predicated of an individual, choices predicated of an individual, All of those things about an individual are contained within the nature of the individual as when it's clearly understood. Now, in the light of that, at the top of the first column of 233, therefore, in the perfect concept of Peter or Judas, okay, Peter or Judas, considered just as a possible object abstracted from the divine decree to create him, there are present in that concept, seen by God, foreknown by God, all the things that will happen to him, necessary as well as free. Hence, it's manifest that God chooses from infinite possible individuals those he considers more suited to the supreme and secret ends of his wisdom. So there are many other individuals that could have been created than Peter, who would deny him, and Judas, who would betray him. Okay? Other possible worlds. This isn't the only possible world. There are other possible worlds in which there would be no Peter and no Judas. Okay? More suited to God's wisdom. Not that he decrees that Peter should sin, or that Judas be damned, but rather that he decrees in preference to other possible individuals, he decrees the Peter. Oh, who will sin? Certainly, yet not necessarily, but freely. And decrees to create Judas, who will suffer damnation. They should come into existence. You see, the decree has to do with the existence. Or that a possible concept should become actual. Now, granted that the future salvation of Peter is contained in the eternal possible concept of Peter, still, this doesn't exclude the intervention of divine grace. How come Peter, who denied him, would be saved? Oh, by virtue of divine grace, making God himself desirable, more than in the case of the denial. You see. By God's grace, God acting in that case, yes, Peter could be saved. So that the aids of divine grace are also contained under the aspect of possibility, that is to say, in the conception of Peter that includes all of his acts and choices. So he seems to be saying in that passage that there is, yes, still freedom, not necessity, but it's a freedom by virtue of what God does. A freedom to find salvation. Freedom, if you like, to modify one's own nature in that regard. Well, ambiguity then. Is he opting for a conception of freedom as indeterminism? Or is he opting for a conception of freedom rather as a kind of compatibilism? He certainly seems to be saying that freedom is compatible with having a pre-established nature, a preconceived nature, predetermined nature. It's compatible with that. He is saying that it's possible that our nature be modified, but that's part of the predetermination of the nature. He is saying that we are free to modify the direction of our desires, to modify our nature, when with reflection we understand what is good. A clear conception of God, and Peter loves him instead of denies him. You see. He was confused at the betrayal. So, how are you going to take it? The only other missing piece to the puzzle that I can see has to do with the relationship between contingent and necessary truth. When he's talking about epistemology, as we've noted, he distinguishes between those two. Contingent truths depend on certain things happening. They don't logically have to be. Now, there is a passage, we don't have it in the anthology, where he speaks of God's own knowledge, and seems to say that God's own knowledge is all of necessary truth. Now, you see, from our standpoint, what happens to Peter is contingent on certain things happening, contingent on God in his grace reaching Peter. From our standpoint, it's contingent, but from God's pre-knowledge standpoint, what we regard as contingent is something which is logically necessary to the perfection of the whole. He chooses in terms of the perfection of the whole. So it looks as if the principle of perfection, having to do with the nature of the whole hierarchy and its compactness, requires that there be the Peter and the Judas, you see. And that Peter be the one who denies and Judas be the one who betrays. Now, is that a compatibilism which reduces to determinism? That's the question. And an indeterminist, like, for instance, Bill Hasker, who wrote the little metaphysics book that some of you may have read in the InterVarsity series, an ardent indeterminist. I had him as an undergraduate when I taught a theology course, and he was the most anti-Calvinist Arminian, vocally, that I think I ever had in class. An ardent indeterminist theologically, an ardent indeterminist philosophically now. And he would say, yes, all compatibilism just slides into determinism. It's a mask for determinism, nothing more. Well, I leave you to face the question, is it or is it not? I'm inclined to think that Leibniz intends not to be a determinist, but he doesn't want the free will in a vacuum of Descartes. He's too much the Calvinist for that, but he's not Calvinist enough to be a necessitarian. Okay. Not Calvinist enough? I don't think Calvin was a necessitarian either. So, be that as it may. All right, so much on the freedom determinism thing. Any question, comment there?
I'm curious as to how close Leibniz's view is to belief in middle knowledge as espoused by Kant.
Yeah, I don't think that, at least I've never thought of Leibniz as following that route. It seems to me that was a route which, who was it in the late Middle Ages developed, which has been resurrected more recently. And, I don't know if there's anybody in the work that's going on middle knowledge who has tapped into Leibniz on this or not. I don't know.
Leibniz is talking about how sort of in any given